You have to play a game.
Hide and seek?
They think they have to kill you before sunrise.
Ready or Not.
Ready or Not is a 2019 dark comedy film with a splash of action. It was directed by Matt Bettinelli-Oplin and Tyler Gillett, with a screenplay by Guy Busick and Ryan Christopher Murphy. The film stars Samara Weaving, who plays Grace, a young woman who is about to marry the love of her life, or so she thinks. The first quarter of the film follows Grace as she meets her in-laws on the day of her wedding, which is super strange, but I guess it's okay in this instance. After the ceremony, Grace is told by the family that it is tradition for them to play a game at midnight to initiate her welcoming into the family. At midnight, they all go into a room where she pulls a card which will then tell them what game they will be playing. The card that she plays is hide and seek. What Grace doesn't know is that the game will end with the family killing her and sacrificing her to the devil. The aim of the game is that they have 6 hours to find her as she's hiding somewhere in their mansion. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, they're like ridiculously rich. How did they get rich? Well, none other than sacrificing things to the devil so that they can then become rich. It's definitely a story that we've heard before and we've seen many times in film, television, and books, but this take definitely has a little bit of a twist to it. So naturally, Grace is trying to avoid the family and make it till dawn, which is apparently when they need to kill her by, otherwise the family then dies instead. Her newfound husband obviously is totally against this, so he is chained up for most of the movie until he breaks free towards the end and begins to help her. Throughout the film, all of her in-laws are just seen chasing her around this big giant house with different types of weapons and trying to hunt her down, and in the process, obviously a few other extra people get killed. There's a handful of other female characters in this film, including Grace, and we are going to start by talking about Emily. Emily is portrayed as a typical modern girl. She references social media, she's pretty young and dumb, she does cocaine regularly throughout the film, which adds to her whole not really knowing what she's doing in life type vibe that they're giving her, and she's also super giddy, but also sort of an airhead. Now, when it comes to films, and horror films in particular, this is definitely a stereotype that we see pretty often. Emily's character isn't exactly groundbreaking when it comes to female characters in films, and she doesn't really provide anything to move the story along. However, she does fit a very true idea of what girls are like in today's society. Although she doesn't really do anything for the story, Emily actually kills two of the other female characters in the film. Albeit they are not main characters, they are both just maids or servants of some sort that work in this mansion, but Emily's character does kill them both by accident, thus adding to her klutzy, I don't know what I'm doing, airhead girl kind of vibe.
Damn it, Emily!
I don't know what I'm doing!
Next on the list is Charity. Charity is Daniel's wife, so she is also a girl who has married into this crazy family. Charity obviously wasn't killed because she didn't pull the hide and seek card. In one scene in the movie, we find out that she comes from a hard background and probably a life of poverty, so she's actually very on board with the family's ritual and ways in order to keep their fame and riches. In the first scene that we see her in, she's talking as if she thinks very highly of herself, and she's actually trash talking Grace. She doesn't think that she belongs in the family or that she can do what needs to be done, which obviously we learn later on. She doesn't belong in the family, but she does do what she needs to do, which is take the family out instead. Charity embraces the greed and the power that the sacrifice comes with, and she actually has no issue trying to kill Grace or being a part of this family. She's very vain. We see her touching up her makeup during the hunt. Charity is also seen quarreling with her husband a lot of the time. Her husband is Daniel, who's played by Adam Brody. Daniel also doesn't enjoy what his family is doing. We can see that he is trying to cope throughout the movie with what they're doing by drinking and not really participating. Charity then gets upset with him because she doesn't want to lose everything that she has gained. Overall, Charity is actually a very authentic character in the sense that she doesn't necessarily just represent women in this situation, but I think she represents what a lot of people would be like. A lot of people, if faced with the decision of either sacrificing someone that they didn't like or didn't care about and having everything that they could possibly want, would most likely react in the same same way that she has, especially if they've been living in that same lifestyle for a while now. I really enjoyed how they sort of twisted the relationship between Daniel and Charity, as in examples in other films and in the past, it's usually the woman who has the softer heart and feels for whoever the victim is. In this case, it's Grace, and usually the husband is the one with a stronger backbone. But in this case, Charity is the one who wants to kill her, and her husband Daniel is the one who is against it. So it was a nice, refreshing take on the relationship being flipped and her having the more cutthroat masculine side, whereas Daniel had a more softer feminine feel of empathy towards Grace.
What the fuck is wrong with you? You fucking animal! Fucking rich people!
Next up we have Becky, who is actually the mother of the family. From the beginning, she gives off a very charming and endearing demeanor. She seems to care for Grace a lot and speaks highly of her son, whom she is marrying, and also speaks highly of Grace to her son, letting him know multiple times throughout the film that she really likes her. Becky is very family focused. She's a very authentic view of what a mother is, or at least what people believe mothers to be. She cares a lot for her family. She wants them to be together. Alex, who is Grace's husband, has been away from his family. As we learn, he doesn't really agree with their ways because of the whole sacrificing people to the devil. And Becky tries to convince Grace to lure Alex back into their family so that they can be whole again. Of course, Grace agrees to this because she doesn't actually know what the family is all about. But Alex knows, and that's why he's been away from his family for so long, and that's why his family is just barely meeting Grace on the day of their wedding. Becky is very family focused, and she cares a lot about her children, and so it makes a lot of sense that when the time comes that they have to kill Grace, she is on board regardless of the fact that she really likes her, because she knows that if she doesn't help kill Grace, that her children will then die instead. She never really seems worried throughout the film about herself being on the line or dying, but more so that she has to kill Grace in order for her family to survive. Although I feel like Becky was lacking a bit of empathy in the sense that she didn't really seem too sad to kill Grace, it was still pretty realistic in the sense that you could understand her motives.
Sweetheart, maybe you should just stay here. I always sort of dreamed of having a family. I mean, I'm sure Alex would have loved living in sin forever. I don't doubt it. But he really understood how important it was for me to finally have a real, permanent family. Finally, one of our children has brought home a good one. And you don't know how grateful we are that you brought Alex back to us. I meant what I said this morning. I thought you were going to be the new me, but I'm not going to let you hurt my family.
There is one other character who is Aunt Helene or Aunt Helen. I'm not entirely sure. I will not be analyzing her, however, though, because I felt like her character was way too stereotypical. Also, the acting to portray her character was not good at all in my opinion. Therefore, I feel like I can't give a fair analysis of what her character meant for female characters in film. However, if you watch the film, I'm sure that you will understand why her character was not in this video. And finally, we have Grace herself, who is again the main lead of the film and is played by Samara Weaving. Now, Samara Weaving, before we get into Grace's character, is no stranger to horror films and comedy films, as she was also in Netflix's film The Babysitter, where she played the same type of character but on the reverse side, where she was actually the one trying to make a sacrifice to the devil. That being said, Weaving's portrayal of this character I felt was very superb. I feel like she was very on par and it was all very realistic. She had amazing comedic timing for the comedy portion of the film, and she also had great stakes in her acting when it came to the thrilling parts of the film. When it comes to Grace, we learn early on that she's going to be a sort of a rebel character. In one of the very first first scenes that we see her, she's actually smoking indoors inside this family's mansion. Now, normally I wouldn't pay a lot of attention to this. I would just assume that she's smoking and that's that. But it isn't until her groom comes into the room and addresses the fact that she's smoking. The scene where she's shown smoking indoors can help us understand the fact that early on she's going to be a rebel and she's going to do what she wants.
You're just another sacrifice. You're another goat. Fuck the altar. I'm gonna do it right here.
We also quickly learn that she has no issue using profanity and vulgar language as she curses to her husband and throughout the film. I didn't find this distracting. I felt this was a very realistic choice of dialogue, especially if there's an entire family trying to kill you and hunt you down in a giant mansion. I imagine anyone's language would be just as vulgar. She had a lot of comedic moments, which probably wouldn't be very realistic in the setting for someone else, but it was a movie, and for the entertainment purposes, it was funny, and she did hit her mark with all of those lines. From all of that, we can gather that Grace is very strong-willed, that she's sarcastic, a little bit sassy, and early on we understand that she's going to be a fighter, and that she's not going to fall under that stereotypical umbrella of females in film and females in horror films, to be exact, where they're helpless and they're damsels in distress, or that they can't really do anything without a man coming in to fix something or save them from a situation.
Georgie? Oh, thank God. Okay. Okay, listen, I know this is really, really scary, but... You little fucker!
Some other stereotypes that we're used to seeing for women in film is that they're always prim and proper and have very good manners, and like I said prior, Grace doesn't really fit that stereotype as she speaks freely what's on her mind, no matter the language or the vulgarity of it, and she also is very strong-willed in wanting to do what she wants and saying what she feels when she feels it. This is a very nice, refreshing take to see for women in film, especially to have someone who isn't so reliant on a man, because her husband is in fact tied up for a good portion of the movie, so they are separated and she's not relying on him to keep her alive, but she's more so just relying on herself to do what she has to do to get from point A to point B. Now for women, this is important for them to see in film because one, it gives women and girls the idea and the expectation that they can get themselves out of hard situations like Grace is. Although most women will never come in contact with a scenario like this, it doesn't mean that they can't draw from this and understand that when put in a place where they don't feel safe, or when put in a place where there's a group of people against them, that they can be strong enough to overcome and move on with whatever they have to do.
I just came to get a drink. I have to call the others.
No, you don't. No. You can help me, please.
This doesn't end well for you. I just don't want to be the one to serve you up.
Daniel, I'm begging you.
I'm really sorry about all this. It's true what they say, the rich really are different. I'll give you a 10-second head start.
Daniel.
There's also a few moments where Grace remarks about the family's wealth and that they're very rich, which then helps us identify with the fact that she is not also rich and that she's just a typical kind of middle class civilian that people who are watching in the audience can then identify with, because a lot of us who are watching are not rich and do not own mansions, so we can't necessarily identify with the family or any of those characters, but it's very easy for anyone to watch, especially other girls, to identify with Grace's character. There was also a lot of authenticity with the way that Grace presented herself in her fighting. Typically in films, there's those cheesy one-liners that they deliver before, shooting someone or hitting someone, or there's the big speech that they give and it gets them in trouble, or even just those little tropes where a girl is running and she trips at the wrong point, and all of those types of things. And never once in this film did Grace ever fall victim to any of those typical tropes, any of those cheesy stereotypes that we're used to seeing for women in film and women in horror films. If anything, all we ever saw her do was thinking things out, moving from one point to another, doing whatever she had to do to get there, hurting whoever she had to hurt in order to get past them. And so it was just a really refreshing take to see a really strong female lead doing the things that we would expect them to do and allowing the audience to be able to cheer for them and also identify with how they would respond in those same situations. When it comes to costume design and wardrobe for this film, she was a bride, and so she does wear a wedding dress for a majority of the film. However, later in the film, when she begins being hunted and she's trying to run away from this family, she does change out her shoes from her wedding heels into a pair of Converse, which is very relatable and also just a very sensible choice, because I feel like in that situation the audience would expect her to wear sneakers or something that she can run in. She also rips her dress about 3 or 4 inches off of the ground. She completely removes the train so that she can move a little bit more freely in it, although it does seem a little unrealistic for her to be running throughout the night in a wedding dress. It's also what she's forced to wear because of the circumstances. One other interesting detail to note about the costume design and wardrobe for this film is that they gave Grace blonde hair, and she wears obviously a white wedding gown throughout the film, but the other female characters in the movie are pretty much always wearing darker colors, whether it be black or blue, and all have dark hair. It's a really interesting choice to have that contrast between good and evil, light and dark, even with the costumes. It was just a very nice choice that I enjoyed very much. Overall, all the female characters in this film are definitely necessary for today's modern world and for females watching everywhere. All of the characters had their own diverse feelings, emotions, and objectives, regardless of what the end goal was. Sure, some of them had typical tropes and stereotypes to their characters, but they were necessary to move the plot and storyline along. Overall, the main character here is Grace, and I think her character, above all the other female characters in the film, was the most important and got the best message across for female viewers, and that is independence, strong will, and female empowerment. All of those factored into her survival and are what kept her alive throughout the film. One other note to make about this film is that even though it was directed by 2 men and that it was written by 2 other men, it still had very well written out, fleshed out female characters, and not just 1, but 4. I think when it comes to writing in cinema, that men are moving in a different direction when it comes to writing their female characters, and this is a nice fresh take that I'm hoping to see more of in the future cinematic world. Overall, I definitely recommend that everyone watches this film, not just female moviegoers. Not only is it super entertaining and funny and gives lots of thrills and chills, but it also gives a really great view on how a female lead can carry a movie and doesn't need all of the gimmicks or movie tropes that usually come with a female-led film. Definitely a 10 out of 10.